learning vocabulary is the main problem you have to solve in language learning. Vocabulary is, out of the three things that you have to learn, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation, it's by far the one that's the most important and the one that takes the most time to learn, because you have to learn a massive amount of vocabulary. It's a lot of words. Grammar, you can learn it relatively easily if you know how, and pronunciation, if you practice a little bit, it's not that hard to get decent enough to understand and to be understood. But vocabulary is where most people struggle, because it's a lot of information that you need to memorize, especially if the language is not similar to the ones you already speak. And not learning vocabulary, not learning enough vocabulary, or not learning what's fast enough is the main reason why people get stuck. People just quit because they get discouraged, or they get stuck forever at the intermediate level because they're not learning vocabulary fast enough. So how do we solve this? Well, these days the most popular way of learning vocabulary, especially online, YouTube, and the online language learning community, it's to simply get more input. Just watch more videos, read more, all of that. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. What I'm saying is it doesn't work fast enough. It's very, very slow. And I'm going to tell you why. The thing with vocabulary is that you have to imagine it as a triangle. It's an inverted triangle. It looks like this. So basically, when you're at the bottom, the vocabulary you have to learn is very narrow. Yeah, at the bottom of the inverted triangle, A1, A2 levels, all those words that you need to know at those levels are very high frequency, and if you get enough input, you'll see those words in context over and over again, and you'll learn them relatively quickly by sheer repetition. Yeah. The problem is that with every level, the more you level up in the language, the more vocab you need to learn. So you need to know roughly double the amount of words at a B1 level that you need to know at an A2 level, and double the amount of words at a B2 level that you need at a B1 level, and you get the idea. Yeah, so you have to keep increasing the amount of words you learn. So that's one problem. But the much bigger problem is that the frequency of those words drops significantly. Yeah, so it's an inverted triangle, and the first few hundred words, 1,000-ish words, you learn them fast because they show up all the time. But then you have to learn way more words to keep advancing, and then more and more words, ever increasing amount of words. And each one of them will require a bigger amount of input because those words are less frequent, which makes learning by input extremely time inefficient, especially at the intermediate and advanced levels. It is true that you already understand a decent amount of the input if you know the most common words, but still, if there are one or two words in a sentence that you don't know, that already makes the sentence incomprehensible, because those words will be keywords that will stop you from understanding the meaning of the sentence. So, yeah, that's where the problem is. So, how do we solve this? My advice is this. There are several ways to learn vocab, but these are the basic principles. This is how you learn vocab efficiently. These are some things that you need to keep in mind. You're always more likely to remember vocabulary that's relevant to you. If there are words that you need to use and that you want to use, you're much more likely to remember them. You're also more likely to remember words that you use actively instead of just passively absorbing them. That's why output is more effective time-wise than input. Although you need both, obviously. So, yeah, use them actively. They should be relevant. Not all of them can be relevant, but you should start with the relevant ones. Words are much easier to remember if you repeat them, repetition. You see them again and again. And this is easy in the beginning when you are learning high frequency words, but it's much more difficult when you are learning low frequency words, which you need to get to an advanced level to become fluent and then proficient in the language. And words are also easier to remember if you do active recall. Finally, if you learn to use mnemonic associations, it will be really, really helpful because it will help you memorize a lot of words fast, and then you can review those words by seeing them in context. But let's say you don't want to use mnemonic associations. I highly recommend you learn to use mnemonic associations, by the way. But if you don't want to use them, there are still many other things you can do. So basically, what I recommend is start with relevant words. What does this mean? Language islands. Write your language islands. Everything you want to be able to say, write all your sentences. It should be over 1,000 sentences easily. All the situations, conversations, interactions you want to have, everything you want to say. And just with that, you'll learn thousands of practical, useful sentences that are relevant to you, and you'll learn them in context just by doing that. And that's a very good core of vocabulary that you learn that then will help you learn everything else. But that's not enough. That's good for using, and if you learn those relevant words also by actively using them, so you listen and repeat, read aloud, etc., you're more likely to remember them, even easier to remember. You should also do retrieval practice, active recall, whatever you want to call it, with them. So translate from your language into the target language. And this way, again, it makes it even more effective. So you combine relevant words, relevant sentences with lots of repetition, retrieval practice, active recall, and actively actually saying them aloud. And you combine all of those things and you learn thousands of words fast. What do we do with the rest of the words? Because that's a minority of the words. There's a lot of other words that you need to learn that are not, that will not be included in your language islands, because you can't really prepare for absolutely everything. A language has a massive amount of words that you need to learn in order to understand everything, because you never know what you will have to understand, right? You know a lot more vocabulary to understand a language than you need to speak it. If you know a few thousand words, and if they are the right words, and you know complete sentences, you'll be able to speak very well. But you need way more than that to be able to understand, because they'll be using a lot of words that you don't use. So how do we learn all of that? Basically, we do the same thing. And again, I highly recommend using mnemonics. Just take lists, massive lists. I've got lists of 15, 20,000 words with example sentences. Always work with example sentences because context is important. Words are meant to be used in sentences, not in isolation. So they'll be easier to remember if you see them in sentences. But I highly recommend you learn the mnemonics technique and you go through the whole list and you create associations for all the words. But that'd be a monumental task. And a way to make it faster is to use word families. So if these words are grouped in families of related words, then you only have to create a mnemonic association for one of them instead of the whole list. So to learn 20,000 words, let's say there are 2,000 word families there, and each one has 10 words in it. You just have to create 2,000 mnemonic associations to learn 20,000 words. Then the rest of it, you just learn it in context. So mnemonics for keywords, and then context, lots of example sentences, word families, learn similar words together, and finally then do it actively. So once you've read and listened to those sentences several times and you can maybe recognize them somewhat, it's time to do active recall. And this is a lot of work, it's effort, and it's really frustrating, but it's the best way to learn all those words actively. You simply translate the sentences from your language into the target language, all the sentences, and you learn to think in the language. This, by the way, is a really good way to learn grammar as well, but it's extremely effective for vocabulary acquisition. People don't do it because it's hard work and people want to avoid hard work, but it works. If you do all these things, you can learn vocabulary fast, and I mean really fast. All you need to do is grab a list, thousands of words, start with the most common ones, the ones that are most common in the language, but also the ones that are more relevant to you, the ones that you're more likely to use. Start with those, and once you've learned those, everything else. And learn them actively, saying them aloud, use mnemonics, and learn them in groups of the same sentences. And that's it. You just have to keep doing it until you understand everything and you're able to speak well.